All righty.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Fitness in Philosophy podcast. Today we are going to be discussing tradition and fitness. How are you doing today, James?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the little, what's it called? What's the word language for a pre-podcast conversation? Prologue? Prelogue?
Warm up. Yeah.
Warm-ups are not stupid.
Yes.
For podcasts.
I almost feel like, because, it depends on the time, but that can sometimes be 20, 30 minutes. Like that should be its own sub podcast.
Yeah.
The behind the scenes.
That's right. Well, it is. I have my phone on. So I got some info in there on you. I'll pull out when's necessary. Nicknames and the like,
Have you ever seen Honest Trailers? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. It's basically these comedic takes on movies, kind of like they're pretty funny. They do like a send up of like the Matrix or the Spider-Man movies. I'll send you one. But anyway, okay. They're maybe like 6-7 minutes long, lambasting Dune or what have you. Just fun. But then they have like a 50-minute commentary. They have like a 50-minute like making the Dune thing. So like, we could have the pre-podcast podcast. But
yeah, I love that. Man, with all the with long form podcasts, by the way, I heard one podcaster say to his listeners, "What's up, podcats?" I thought that was pretty cool. So we may want to start with a different version than that. We wouldn't want to get into the cat dog controversy, but I think we'd have to go further to the dog side with our historical history, right? By all means, right?
Yes.
So what's up, pod dogs?
What's up, pod dogs?
Yeah.
Well, it's no longer big dogs. So hey, can we?
That's right. Let's use it.
Yeah.
The pod dog pod. Anyways, we'll work with it. But my whole point there is they also mentioned that people are really interested in this long form podcast now, and I was thinking, okay, cool. But inside the tube, the whole system, with the prevalence and rise of so many people doing so many podcasts, isn't that, what's your thoughts on that? Is like, who's listening to anything? If all those 100 podcasts come up, I think it's like 10 million, by the way. I found the number, 10 million available podcasts. And this is the point, that are listened to, right? So there's lots of podcasts that no one will ever listen to, kind of like the Big Dogs podcast. But so I don't know, what's your thoughts on that? Like, is that essentially like pull away an audience down to a unique audience? And then are we just getting into a bubble of speaking to people who only want to listen to us? And isn't that the whole reason why we started it, is to get into other areas? It's like Substack issue I see going on, right? Everyone's like, oh, it's the new blog. And I saw what happened with the blog. Everyone's like, oh, this allows everyone to be a writer, everyone to voice their opinion. And guess what happened after 15 years? Journalism is, no one knows what journalism is anymore. And now you have paywalls and like little tight areas that you can get into and listen to this person speak. Only $5.99 a month. You know what I mean? So it's not, quote unquote, that free information anymore. Sort of take us off on that note. Thoughts?
No, it's an interesting one. I wonder if I took a screenshot of this on my phone. I did see something like that, but they were talking about it in the context of like, should you start a podcast? But they were saying like something like only 20% of the 10 million available like actually have continuous ongoing episodes.
Yeah.
Like, are things that was just like abandoned.
Yeah.
So that was just thought one in terms of like, who's actually continuing with it and sticking with it.
But dude, that's 2 million.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you know how many zeros are in millions?
No, that's true. The second thing I think there is, it's just interesting from a attention span perspective that things like YouTube videos and podcasts have gotten increasingly longer, whereas TikToks and Reels are just like, as our attention span has gotten shorter, like podcasts for some reason, maybe it's because people listen to them on the drive or in other contexts, but it's interesting how As far as I'm aware, from what I see of like top podcasts and what I know, it's like the longer ones are typically um, the ones that are doing well. And then the third thought I had is, yeah, I mean, with the niching thing, I think I tend to agree with you in a lot of ways. I mean, I do wonder, kind of like you've talked about before with like a Walter Cronkite or like the paper of record or something like that, people being able to go back to it. You know, I don't know with kind of our current situation how one maybe it is worse, but I'm not sure how one changes that with like we have
Just go to North Korea.
Yeah, North Korea. Here's your news. World Report. All the news that's fit.
I just found a way without us going into a quagmire here and a philosophical dilemma based upon what I just proposed to think about. I do see this as a possible segue into tradition. We can kind of tie in tradition and fitness inside of that too, and hopefully maybe we'll bring it up. Because I want to discuss. Where the well-intentioned voice of fitness. Using Walter Cronkite, right? There's some positives to that. You could argue through all the negatives of propaganda, what is real, and et cetera, and directions and et cetera. But if you got 65,000 Walter Cronkites and, on a background level, they're split into thirds, of belief, right? And where I was going with that. Then you have, it should make sense when you have this big issue with what is speech, what is freedom of speech, what is, what is real, what is true. Yeah, I mean, it should make sense, right? But now take a fitness light into that, right? There used to be, just a few voices that people could look to, right? And there's just a lot of voices, so that's okay. But for the collective interest of what we're trying to do in the big movement of fitness forward in knowledge towards wisdom, got a problem, right? Got a problem. So we'll tie in tradition in there,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that's, I mean, whether it's today with different fitness traditions or just in general with, there, as we'll probably talk about, there were certain benefits to being part of a particular group culture and having a set of beliefs and a way of life and a set of ethics. Of course, there are multiple downsides to that, dogmatism and, the deepest things you believe about the universe and your deepest ethical thoughts being imposed from outside of you, and then Kant and others talking about the notion of autonomy and self-knowledge and things like that. So yeah, it is something that I feel like they're very interesting philosophical questions on both sides, because there's definitely something that's being lost when certain traditions are being given up. Certainly something that's being lost when it's 65,000 different voices, and maybe the question is which is the least bad of the two, or which is the better one. So So like we were saying at the beginning, we're going to talk about tradition and fitness today. So our last episode was progress in fitness, and we don't always do couplets, but this actually I think serves as a nice couplet, where we were talking about, is there a possibility for fitness to progress and to move forward, or should we go back and it's just the same things that we have gleaned from evolution and just repeated over a long period of time. And that leads us to the question of tradition and what role does that play in fitness, and are there fitness traditions, and which ones should we listen to and which ones shouldn't we? So first thing to start off with is just basic definition, right? So what is tradition? So the passing down of elements of a culture from generation to generation, especially by oral communication. That's something that I mentioned in here, like for all of human history up until agriculture and civilization, tradition was oral. And even after the written word, like literacy is a fairly recent phenomenon, where we're talking about like for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, like 10,000 years, 12,000.
Well, and that's the introduction of literacy, and like people are writing stuff down, but the vast majority of the population is not literate until like very, very, very recently.
Okay.
A mode of thought or behavior followed by people continuously from generation to generation, a custom or usage. A set of such customs and usages viewed as a coherent body of precedents influencing the present. A synonym here would be heritage. Now, an interesting thing to think about is pretty much any religion you can think of today, even philosophy, like none of those things are older than 10,000 years, and much of them significantly shorter. Like
Mhm.
Judaism will tend to make the claim to fame of being one of the, oldest religion that, or oldest continuously practiced religion at roughly something like 6,000 years. But, on the cultural time scale of 10,000 years, that's a long period of time. But again, take this biological time span of like,
Yeah.
whoa, what was going
Yeah.
on before that?
Yeah.
What was
Yeah.
going on before art and music and philosophy and science? So it's an interesting question there.
Yeah.
Um, tradition versus modernity. Now, this is obviously a bit reductionist, and we can, have quibbles with each of these, but I don't think it's an unfair characterization to say something like the following. Typically, when we talk about traditional society, knowing your place. Whereas in modern societies, for better or worse, there's this notion of the rejection of authority, or the individual over the group, or moving outside of your social group, not being such that you are born into a particular, we see this in, the caste system in, or what had been the caste system in India, or, for one reason or another, British society is obsessed with the notion of like commoner versus royalty, and like, what does that
Mhm.
even mean? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
moving beyond your station.
Mhm.
So, pros and cons to each of those, but would you agree with those characterizations? Do you feel like that's kind of a fair way to put it?
Oh, for sure. I just keep thinking about, again, our previous conversation of what modernity brings for, just the young person's first impressions of what that is, right? Because with let's call it the young person having the web and having access to, like, seeing how people act in China, seeing how people act in Russia, seeing how what's going on in Ukraine, understanding Central Africa's issues, hearing about Brazilian uprising, going to, it's like a very quick way of counteracting your point on like, oh, this is how it's done.
Right.
So that's what I think about right away, is this online globalism of how that, like, indirectly puts a big crack into tradition, even the word.
Yeah, and I mean, there are obviously some good aspects to that. I mean, I think, thinking back to one of my, favorite philosophers, Spinoza, who grew up in the, Amsterdam, Jewish community, and was excommunicated. For previous people who like grew up in a community, like all you had was your thoughts that, oh, maybe something else is out there,
Yeah.
a book or two.
Yeah.
And now it's like, again, for better and maybe for worse in certain cases, like exposure to new ideas, and to, how many people, 1,000 years ago could travel.
Yeah. You had to get super creative, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember hearing on a podcast, one old wise person said that you could kill racism and fascism by travel and books. And such a simple statement, but man, so just replace books with, like, information and access to
Right.
information, right? You can crush all of it, because it just opens your eyes to those, what you could be born into, a traditional caste system, a tradition belief, and
Right.
now it's like, gosh, dad,
Yeah.
what the hell is with this?
And that's a good point too. I mean, access to information seems to be a good thing in a lot of ways, but with kids, like, do they have the context or the understanding or the wisdom to be able to interpret? And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Oof. Yeah.
So some famous examples
I
of
solve world problems here, Robbie.
yeah, no, I mean, I hope that
Gosh.
I hope that person you quoted is right. Doesn't seem like it at the moment, but
Nope.
more information has just made us more entrenched. But so some famous examples of tradition. There's obviously, again, oral versus written, traditions, obviously within religion, many different forms of this. On the monotheistic side, things like Judaism and Catholicism and Islam, and on the sort of Eastern traditions, things like Confucianism or Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism or things like that. Even within that, there's kind of an interesting one within religion and philosophy between those who place more emphasis on reason and logic. And I would put like Maimonides and Aquinas and Averroes in there. And this idea that God wouldn't do something irrational, he wouldn't do something illogical. And then, William of Ockham and Kierkegaard and others who would talk about, no, the whole point of faith, the whole point of all this stuff is like, it goes beyond logic. It goes beyond reason. It's precisely not, rational or reasonable. And so just interesting traditions within religion of different perceptions of how that works. Within the political realm, there's obviously
which group there would answer the reason behind a child with leukemia, like how kids, what's the reason there?
That's a really good question. So I mean, Maimonides, Aquinas, and Averroes, and so I mean, this is obviously we're talking Middle Ages, Central Europe and stuff like that. So I'm not even sure they know what leukemia is. And so I'd have to find out like what particular thing they would have equivalent. I mean, standard theodicy answers, and theodicy just meaning justification of God answers. One go-to as well. That's such as the natural order of things. God's not making that happen. God created the world, and there are certain laws that abide, and one of them is that DNA has certain mutations, and there we go. Now, of course, the immediate, other side of the coin rejoinder to that, on the more God goes beyond rationality perspective as well. If this is the all-knowing, all-loving, all-perfect creator of the world, certainly they could intervene and change such a thing, right?
That's right. So maybe it's only 2 out of the 3 that they are.
Right. Exactly. You gotta pick which one of that triad that you don't like. Exactly. So yeah. and anyone is not a good one to slip out. Yeah. So in the political realm, there's obviously the liberal and conservative traditions, going all the way back to Locke and Hobbes and Rousseau, and certainly their predecessors even there. And this notion of like grappling with issues within the liberal tradition. Like, what do you do when you think people should have freedom of thought, but some of that is like Nazi thought? You know what I mean? Like there are these questions that crop up within those traditions. Within the judicial realm, this is something I've always found interesting. My mom is a lawyer, and I've had this discussion with her. She studies a lot of Supreme Court history. The notion of like precedent. So why is it that if something was decided like 100 years ago, it carries more weight? That's kind of an interesting one too. And should we be able to overturn precedent or not? And so, yeah.
I've just been recently listened to the Arizona Senate and Arizona judge. So I'm not sure what. So he'd be like the equivalent of one of the highest forms of judge seats in our state. And I listened to him speak about the for about 90 minutes or so on the history, because with the current conversation on abortion and the Mississippi law that's trying to be passed for 15 weeks or something like that. And then, where does federal come in versus where do states come in? And then going back over law, right? And listening to the different oral arguments from Kavanaugh, by the way, Brett Kavanaugh, who went through a number of these quote unquote precedents that had an opportunity for change, right? But also then saying that sometimes those precedents are so strong, we want to make sure that we like hold steady with those precedents, so he was saying, and he had reasons for that, I think, just based upon what his thoughts are on the law, more so than the philosophical dilemma of abortion rights, privacy, etc. Anyways, I found that just to add a little asterisk in here, it's extremely fascinating for those who philosophically want to just sit back and contemplate those challenges. The word you brought up there is very simple, but it's deep: precedent and what it means to law.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I think it's an interesting question for fitness, like what is precedent, and, to what
Totally.
extent should that be respected, and should we be deferential to it? I think if precedent means something like, take the Einstein example, like, it's obviously different, but Einsteinian physics has been, confirmed 6 ways from Sunday. Does that mean something couldn't come along and knock it out of, orbit, so to speak, just like he did to Newton? No, it doesn't, but it means there's a really big burden of proof,
Yeah, that's right.
really big burden of proof.
Yeah.
But with the legal case, we do also want to make sure, like, so I forget, I think we said this before the call, but something for you guys just to think about as you're listening. If you study any history, a lot of it's going to come down to this equation of history equals contingency plus entrenchment. So we want to make sure that precedent is not just, well, what they thought in 1848, plus the fact that it was like, oh, we thought this and we're going to continue to think this.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And on your point, I think there's like, because I listened to a number of people from the Federalist groups, just to get a understanding of like what's their intentions on what they would preach around the Federalist Papers. And I've got that there to read, and still have not got into it. But to the point of like, anyways, what I just realized from that, which we don't know as like just civilians, is there really is a tremendous amount of work that is done daily on lots of questioning around those original documents, and like, what is progression of those original documents for the current day and age, and et cetera. It's just that shit, back to my original point, before we got on the podcast, shit over the past 30 years just happened so quickly. You could just imagine all the resources and the brains and everything that needs to go into like, coming up with a newer version of some of these bigger arguments and bigger decisions. And so anyways, I'm just being a little more empathetic to the traditional group, because I just know how there is a lot of people still questioning the very notion of those traditional ideas, and they're trying to work its way around, and it's difficult.
oh yeah, absolutely. There's this famous G.K. Chesterton quote that we were discussing before the podcast that I think kind of highlights, some of the bigger things that we'll try to discuss within fitness. So I guess just to get the gist of it, I'll just read it. So, in the matter of reforming things as distinct from deforming them, there is one plain and simple principle, a principle which will probably be called a paradox. There exists in such a case a certain institution or law, let us say, for the sake of simplicity, a fence or gate erected across a road. The more modern type of reformer goes gaily up to it and says, I don't see the use of it. Let's clear this away. To which the more intelligent type of reformer will do well to answer, if you don't see the use of it, I certainly won't let you clear it away. Go away and think. Then, when you can come back and tell me what you do see the use of it, I may allow you to destroy it. So I think this is just, we were discussing it before the call, and I think this is worth it to discuss with relation to fitness. We were talking about there's this constant tension between whether it's philosophy or science or fitness, deference to those who have come before you, those who have lived longer lives before you, respect for what they've known, for what they've experienced, and saying, well, yeah, you know what, maybe at the end of my life or 30 years from now, I will agree with what they had to say. But then there's the other side where like all progress, or a lot of progress in philosophy and science and other things came from saying, you know what, I respect what they have to say. I see where they're coming from, but I'm going to use my own reason, and I'm not sure. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the.
Oh gosh, so much, but I think it's just good that you brought it up for people to think about, especially on not just the liberal conservative differences and explanation of it, but to go deeper on using the fence and law and that gate as like multiple different scenarios. I think that's would be a good challenge to any of the listeners to take, and just sit back and say, okay, well, where have I, done that? Where have I used that kind of reasoning, or where have I just wanted to like, oh, that's a stupid law, that's a stupid rule, and you didn't give it its time, or you didn't think about that. I also think about what I had mentioned of time being a ridiculous constraint for experience, and then communication, right? So just look at us, and look at our audience. We don't have a lot of 72-year-olds listening in. to the, and it sounds humorous, but why not? Right. And there's lots of answers to why not, but, and then what do 65 to 80-year-olds contribute in regards to that conversation? And I think if, to your notion, if it takes a whole life to get to a point that's called wisdom and sagedom, and your whole purpose at that point in time is to share the information of what you learned to make people aware, listen, be patient, take your time, what you think you know right now, give it 20 years and then give it 40 and then give it 60 and give it 80. It'd be really great to hear that a lot. Right. But no, we're all 30 to 35 and we're all just like speaking back and forth on, this is true. No, this is true. So that's what I think about when you propose that patience and the constraints around time. And as another side, before you get to what for that, if anyone on here listening who is currently at a point in their life where they want to continue to spend time with themselves and their own thoughts around the concept of faith and the concept of where faith and religion may fit into the whole big picture for you. I spent lots of time there, and I just wanted to make mention of Chesterton's writing Orthodoxy. Was a really nice book, a really nice booklet to give some explanation to some of those. If anyone is like, geez, I'd like to get, reasoning on this picture and the purpose behind this reasoning, etc. He does a wonderful job of that. Just as a side note, because you brought it up, and never know, anyone could be listening in and is in the same area. So
absolutely. No,
thanks
super.
for allowing me to take the time.
Oh yeah, no problem. I think one of the things the quote highlights, and these are tendencies, and it's certainly not true for everyone, but I think it's fairly true, whether it's politically or religiously or otherwise. People who are more of a conservative bent, the thought is something to the effect of, well, we've been doing it for a long time, there must be a reason. And those who are a little bit more liberal is kind of like, well, just because we've been doing it for a long time doesn't really mean much, if anything. Sometimes it can, but sometimes it doesn't. And I guess maybe where I tend to fall is like time as a way of chiseling away at things can be really good at chiseling away at wisdom, but it can also just as equally be contingency plus entrenchment equals history. It can just be like, well, you know what, we did this thing once, and then like this person said you should be doing it, and then 1,000 years later people are doing it and they have no idea why the hell it ever started. And if you go back to why it started, it was like, well, I don't know. So I do think it's I think time can equally reveal wisdom and truths and different things like that, but that ultimately need to be fact checked by reason, right? And then I do think it just is that this is where I would go against kind of the maybe more conservative side of things. I think it can just as easily perpetuate nonsense, propaganda, irrationality for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And when you look for the underlying reason behind it, it's nothing besides we've done it for a really long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I see very similar. I see it the very similar ways. It's also, I got a question there. Where does culture fit into your equation? With like, your equation, does it hold true in 1995, or is that where contingency sits?
So do you mean, so like where does
like how, or maybe I'm seeing the equation the wrong way. I was just trying to think, like, as time goes on, 2005 versus 2022 versus 2065. What's currently happening at the time does have a part to play on how we view that. So
yeah, but I mean, like I don't know, VHS versus Betamax, or the fact that Netflix is the dominant. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yep.
There are a whole slew of things, and part of it is not just pure. I don't mean to suggest pure contingencies. It's not random accident, but oh man, I know you have studied history, but I'm just saying, like when one studies history, one can get a sense of like, this person wasn't the ruler because they were necessarily better or wiser, or this thing wasn't passed down because it was better or more righteous. It was like, oh, well, they knocked out their competitors, and that's the dominant paradigm, and that's how we think of it. Like a silly example is why is a lisp a feature in Castilian Spanish? Well, a ruler who, he had a lisp, and that's neither bad nor good. But do you see what I mean? It's like this thing that someone had then gets entrenched. There's no reason to necessarily take it away. It's not a good or bad thing. That's what I would reference as like more of an innocuous tradition. But when it comes to like, women shouldn't be priests, or arranged marriages, or the idea that there should be a monarchy, well, that was the way of doing things for a lot longer than the way we've been doing things today. And that's where it's like, well, we've been doing this for 1,000+ years, but is that the right way?
Yeah.
So
I think evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology cannot derive answers to those conundrums, but can certainly help make sense of why those things happen. To my point previously on the evolutionary basis of that, is no conversation unless you start talking about, to your point, adaptations. This is where my culture question comes in, right? Like I forget what you used there, female Catholic priests, or the female
like
Catholic
women still currently in the Catholic Church are not allowed to be priests.
Okay, great, yeah. Like and that's what I meant. It's like, just think about how long, through practice and years and acceptance of that and new thinking and the ability to open up Catholic minds, to like broaden that, how long will that take? And that's my whole point. That whole thing is an adaptive process. That's a long, so 2065, we can go, well, evolution would say, there's man and there's woman, and it's like, okay, we don't stop there though, with what you believe is like entrenched inside of both of those sexes, right? Which I'm sure that's what they'll lie back on when it comes to like, maybe they won't, but anyways, they may lie back on that. But then you say it's 2065, man. I mean, come on, we've adapted to this. That's a single person with the ability to impart knowledge of, the words of God, or the image of God, or, these rules of conformity, or et cetera, whatever you want to call it.
But that's such a super interesting point, that notion of adaptation, and the notion of like, there are different areas of endeavor where adaptation and progress is prized and celebrated, right? So like, philosophy and science are the two that I always kind of reference, where Aristotle, agrees with Plato on some things, but fundamentally disagrees on other things. And Socrates thinks it's ridiculous to write things down rather than have dialogue. And then the only reason we know about Socrates is Plato writing this stuff down.
Yeah.
And, winning the Nobel Prize in science for overturning Newton. And meanwhile, not just in religion, and certainly not in all religions, by any means. There are some that are more progressive and otherwise than others, but the prize to be won is not overthrowing that. It's to keep the notion that homosexuality is a sin, or that women shouldn't be priests, or what have you. And like, that isn't innocuous. That isn't popcorn with the movies. That isn't hot dogs at baseball games. It isn't,
bless you.
It isn't, bless you, or wearing baggy jeans in 1995. That's like interfering with like people's,
or backward jeans,
or backward jeans. Yeah. Or backward jeans. Whoa. Crisscross.
Don't go off.
Catholic sexual ethics, crisscross. Okay, I'm going to take us right back to that. So, this is what I mean, and this is where I think like it. Obviously, it's no surprise here, given the fact that I'm, a philosopher into philosophy, that I'm like on the side. I do think there are reasons for it. It's not just dogmatic, but like, there's a reason for this. There are lots of things that get entrenched in history, and that interfere with people's like livelihoods and well-beings. The idea that like, again, I'm not here to judge anyone else's culture necessarily, but like this idea that you would meet someone once or twice and like your parents would arrange your marriage. Do you know what I mean? Like, or that women shouldn't be allowed to drive. Like, does that have any justification behind it besides, misogyny?
Yeah.
Or it's been entrenched for a long period of time.
Yeah, no.
So that's the thing where you really have to say, it can't just be deference to the past. It
Yeah.
can't just be deference to what we've done for a while. It always has to be mixed with a little bit of, maybe a lot of, why do we think that?
Yeah.
Why do we think that?
Yeah.
So,
And it's nuanced.
yeah.
Right. Because thankfully for your knowledge and intelligence, you can come up with ones that, people are like, yeah, got it. Yeah, got it. Yeah. Women not allowed to go outside or drive. Ooh, like, I think that's the stopping point, right? Like, where's the switch? And there, it is nuanced though, because you all, anyways, there's nuance in all that, but there should be some things at least. And again, we're making huge assumptions here that everyone's intelligent or intuitive enough to like pick up that, because you could just imagine folks as you're going along, right? They're like, oh yeah, and even on that one they're like, oh yeah, like there's no like nothing there.
Yeah.
Nothing, and they're like, no, keep going, it's like, holy crap. So I think that's some of the issues inside there, for that process, and we'll get to that, right? We're going to talk about that for adaptation. I think that I use terminology, Robbie, for to keep going on it. Maybe it's the wrong time, but how that adaptation, there has to be something in the system that keeps assessing, right? That still says like, okay, is this a good adaptation? And what is this turning into? And who decides what good is for it? Because to your point, there's lots of shit happening in the fitness universe that's not a good adaptation. Now, the horse I stand on for that, I was going to throw in there, online stuff or robot teaching or Peloton or, something like that can be deemed as progressive, right? And we can go down a list of, what progression is and cry, accessibility and, yada, yada, yada. And, again, I just don't think you're hitting the majority of the population. I think you're just creating a compensatory adaptation to the laptop class for that kind of concept and idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent point. And I think that's where that gets to the notion that we've talked about before, that's, paradigmatically philosophical about appearance versus reality. There's a lot of stuff today that seems like progress in fitness. Oh, there's data and there's numbers and there's cool new tech and there's this different way I can move. And then we ask the deeper philosophical question, is that legit progress, right? Is that actually taking us anywhere? Is that just the glitz and glamour? And that's, that's certainly the case within, legal scholarship or, political stuff or philosophy too. Like, the counterpoint to the progress or more kind of liberal way of viewing things is like, yeah, sometimes something looks glitzy just because it's new.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks cool, but it's not actually an improvement over what came before. So that is a
point. So it seems like there's like this small print inside of that, right? There's some small print in there that says, oh yeah, we're going to basically play with it, but we're going to keep tracks on it for assessment. We're going to assess it and make sure it's going in the right direction, whatnot. So if there's small print in there, I love the progressive idea, because, we could then argue in terms of, this concept of innovation. You got to have, some people who are going to push that for the concepts of innovation, right? Progression towards what, right? If you're going to progress towards it, you're probably going to have to break down some older models. So there you have that issue between what is tradition and, and again, have that nuanced conversations, right? Kids watching screens. It's like,
yeah, I mean, you also have to ask the question, like, innovation with respect to what field, right? So like you can say like,
yes,
I mean, certainly the notion of TikToks and Reels, that is a technological innovation, that is a cultural innovation. But then when we ask the broader question about like, is that an innovation with regard to how humanity functions and interrelates? That one I'm not so sure.
Yeah,
like it may be a local
innovation. Yeah,
but it may
that's why I use that one.
Yeah,
it's close to home. The energy innovation, that's a good one. Energy innovation is a very interesting one.
Right.
Yeah, especially which, if you listen to any cultural pundit today, the next terminology that's just going to get thrown in there so that it creates warriors and conversation, like maybe racism has for the past number of years, is climate change. That's going to be the next big environmentalism, environmental alarmism, all for the good and bad and whatever, but it's going to be embedded in there. So that would be a good one. What is energy progression? What is the usage of energy progression? because it ties into not only a cultural thing that in the future here in the near couple of years, you're going to have at least some background knowledge on, right? You're going to have all the pros and cons weighed out when you make this, statement on nuclear, right? It's like, oh, nuclear is the way. It's fucking these electric cars on the grid and fucking panels killing birds. Like it's, you just haven't thought it out. Nuclear is so simple. And then you got to have, all the answers to, okay, you get 1,000 more nuclear plants. What do you do with the waste? Right. So it's like there's these things you got to go in with on that energy, quote unquote, energy progression. What is energy progression for the future? So that would be an area I think would be philosophically demanding more so than your point on online or technology progression.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a similar one where we ask, you could ask local questions about like, is this progress within the domain of like how we generate energy, and then more societal question, to take your nuclear energy point, not to argue one way or the other, but just to ask like, okay, well, theoretically, let's say, someone's arguing for like 1,000 more nuclear plants. So at the local level of like energy generation without, crazy carbon emissions, great, awesome, fantastic. But then, like you were saying, to this broader societal level of like, how does this impact society? How do we get rid of this waste? Well, maybe not, maybe not so much of an innovation. And so I think that is a very useful philosophical perspective for people to keep in mind, is this notion of innovation with respect to what? Mm-hmm. Progress with respect to what, in what domain? Like there's a whole slew of things that we encounter today, both in fitness and otherwise, where it seems like it's progress or innovation, and it very well may be with respect to that particular niche of things, but to human flourishing and happiness and wisdom and all the things humans look for, like connection and love and meaning and purpose, maybe not. So
yeah, I'm going to continue on with another interesting area just for our pod dogs may want to get into to go into that area, is the conundrum that a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't speak about, but I just hear, from indirectly listening to people who have, some of those insider conversations, but you can like hear what they're talking about. Is this, they still don't have this, they're not all they're in agreement that we're going to have to be really careful with the speed and growth of artificial intelligence and what it can end up, getting into with regards to how it's going to be used and et cetera. And so that's an area that I would tell people to, if you're really interested in something that for the future will be, it's certainly going to answer this question, like, well, what is progression, and keep playing that story out, read Life 3.0 or Super Intelligence and keep playing it out. And then you'll see, or Anil Seth's new book, and then keep playing it out. And you'll see it's like, maybe we want to like put a halt to the speed and progression of some of those things. Do you know, like, isn't that gross to kind of even think about that as like, yeah, but it's so progressive. It's like, oh gosh, like, I don't know if I want to be alive when that progression occurs. But then I say, and I keep going on with that, is like, well, how about my children? Like my daughters are going to be around for some of those. And so if I know about that, then what do I want to do? And what kind of impact can I have on that contemplation on progression of AI? And what does progression mean? Because tradition would just be pigeons, right? I mean, want to know what the tradition, right. Fire, smoke signals.
Right. And what thoughts or philosophical perspectives can you impart to them that they can then impart to their children about like what things that they'll encounter and how to think rationally about like, hey, just because culture is this way today doesn't mean it should be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, we also always have those movies of where people can transition over time.
Yeah.
Right. And I love the look on the face of the person that sees someone from the future. In all the movies, it's the greatest look. And there's some great directors who do a good job of that, right? But it's the classic one where, it's not like this, but this is just an analogy. The person's like, oh, and they try to stab them with like a stone, and the person just like picks up a laser gun, just shoots them in the face, right? And everyone's like, oh! Like that moment right there is like, anyways, it highlights this whole like, well, what's progression and is it a great adaptation? Does it give us this false sense of security? Anyways. Oosh.
Yeah, no, I so kind of a side thing related to that. So Brandon bought a Meta Quest for his son. You know what that is, the VR headset?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't know that was a name for one of them.
I think it used to be the Oculus, and then
Okay.
Facebook bought it, and now Facebook is Meta, and yeah. So
Super.
anyway, all the different names. So he brought it into the gym, and we were just kind of playing around. I mean, I had done somewhat of VR before, maybe like back in the 90s, but that was obviously very different. And yeah, I mean, part of me wonders, like, are we being old fuddy-duddies just saying like no to this? And the other part is like, gosh, if this is what the future of humanity is, like, I don't know. Is it the fact that I'm, the age that I'm at, that I'm like, this is cool, but like, man, if everyone's just in the Matrix from now on, like, what the fuck is going to happen to humanity? Like, it's very weird. It's very weird.
There's not only the way I think about it more recently is there's not only two options. It's not going to be like the Wall-E option, and it's not only this like, oh, technology is going to help us get there on this new awareness and new ideas and greatest innovations, and not just efficiency, but traditional shit embedded inside of it, so, but it's not only those two options. I really have become, I don't know the terminology for it, but I've just let go of trying to wrap my hands around something that I think will be there, but I just try to lay out all the possible options. Not sure if I'm making sense of that, as opposed to like the future look of things.
Yeah, it's hard to know, and we'll divide into camps who are all plugged into the Matrix, or camps who are like just hunter gatherers again, and yeah, who knows.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that's a great example in wording. It's not just those two options. There's lots.
Oh yeah, there'll be many in between. There'll be the hunter gatherers with whoops, and then the hunter gatherers who will
basically CrossFit today. That's it, right?
They'll play PS5, but they won't put on a Meta Quest.
Like that's true. That's the Orange Theory folks.
Yeah, it's a step too far.
Yeah. CrossFit's not going to go the Oculus route. They're like, no, we need to still keep this physical in the gyms, but we'll have the Whoop band.
Yep.
So we're progressive.
So let's talk about tradition and fitness. I think one place to start off is, I guess, maybe a question about, in one sense, there are traditions in fitness and there aren't traditions in fitness. And please feel free to correct me if you think I'm characterizing it inaccurately. But on the one hand, there is like the set of things people have done throughout evolutionary history, which I don't know that there's necessarily a tradition about, the same way there's like an oral tradition in a particular philosophy, or a written tradition in a particular religion. That's part of what's unique about fitness, right? Is that it's just it's not purely physical, but it's mostly physical. It's not necessarily an oral or written tradition. And then on the flip side, you've got this other side of it where like physical fitness and fitness culture, and this notion of like a fitness coach, are all fairly recent. Like those are very recent traditions, if you want to call them that. So we kind of have this thing where, like, on the one hand, there's an aspect of fitness that is as old as humanity, just the act of moving around.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, you have this kind of more shorter term fitness coaches, and going to a gym and things like that. And then maybe in between would be things like, the Dinny Stones, and people, people having different strongman competitions, or the Highland Games or something like that. Different traditions and different cultures around physical expression. But yeah, I guess just to start off, what are your thoughts on fitness and its relation to tradition, and how we should think about it today?
Yeah, well, no, I'd say the exact same little play you did there, we got to define what fitness is, because the language of that word, you can go back to previous podcast to get it, but the language of that word has changed over a long period of time. because then when you said what are traditions in fitness, I thought, well, what are traditions in fitness, and then what are traditions in fitness coaching? And those are probably two different things. Yeah, so I think you and I, like right now, have to probably get to an understanding of like, and we could be incorrect on the exact dates, but get to at least some like, tough dates on two particular areas, maybe physical culture and then fitness coaching. I think that may derive a bunch of things, and we could jam on like what's the tradition of each of those. Because the word fitness, because it had that like, I guess a weird period of, not even, it was a weird period because it was like, for like Spartans, took off all their clothes and oiled themselves and did each other's hair and exercised for hours prior to battle, and they called it like they called it some form of physical expression and preparation, right? But it was exercise, but it wasn't called that, that was a long time ago. So that, that you could see, and we'll just say that it was lumped into this like exercise for survival and reproduction. Okay. And you could have a host of other things, but then there's a point in time when there's no Spartans, right? And and there's only a select few that have guns, and then there's not strife, between folks, and then there's like artillery and lasers and fucking robots, etc. I'm just quickly getting you through like, well, yeah, there was a period of time where that fitness turned into something that became like a leisure pursuit because we got nothing out of the better to do, or keeps us out of trouble, or we can get these other things from it. And I think we need to figure out what the dates are on that, whether it's like a Jane Fonda era or Jack LaLanne era timeline up to whatever. And then secondly, the fitness coaching, which I would argue, and maybe you could say, well, this is what you use to determine. I think in your notes said 100 to 200 years, but I think you were talking about fitness in general. Fitness coaching, in my opinion, has only been around for 30 years or so, maybe a little bit longer than that. So there was like, quote unquote, coaches who were the neo-generalists, right, in 60s and 70s. That was the track coach, football coach, et cetera. But they handled all the, quote unquote, fitness training for the particular sport. So if you say, well, outside of those particular sports, were these things happening? Not a lot. Like it wasn't even, and you were seen as you were seen as different if you were doing those kind of things, right? Why would you want to be like, are you trying to be Jack LaLanne? So the bodybuilding 60s era, into 70s spawned the 80s start of the quote unquote fitness coaching. So is that really what we're going to use as the language of defining fitness and fitness coaching from that era upwards? Because then we can say, well, what are, to answer your question, long way about it, what are the traditions of that particular era? Because there is still lots in there that we could focus on, and make fun of, especially myself, on bodybuilding traditions and et cetera. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine with that. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I was referencing more like just the like fitness as we call it today, with kind of more of a leisure pursuit, and going back to like,
got it,
beginnings of like kettlebell swings and just the use of kettlebells and things of that nature. And then but yeah, I'm totally fine with that date for coaching. But yeah, I think what's interesting, either way you slice it, is the fact that there's this gigantic discrepancy between like, the act of participating in physical movement and adaptation that's as old as humanity.
Yeah.
And then there's these super, 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 super young, relatively recent traditions of fitness as leisure pursuit, and the coaching of fitness as leisure pursuit that, I'm sure there are other reasons as well, but like we've discussed before, part of the reason why that exists today as well, we went from physically laboring all the time and being relatively fit to eating progressively more junk food and not, sitting all the time. And now we kind of need to do it to not be as unhealthy, not necessarily in the same way that we needed to do other things in the past, but different level of need. So
yeah, there's the conundrum, right? It's the recognizing what are we going to call it, physical culture tradition, right? And then recognizing that it's not, we're not just, you and I are not here, and people are not just born into this now society and this time of our history being like, it's just well accepted that you're going to be a moving human for 85 years and that you're going to eat, good foods and act in a civil way. So that's not the case, right? So this is the rub of saying, well, what are the traditions? And I think you started us off really on what we could come up with as traditions. There are, whether we like them or not, there are intentions of the leisure pursuit of fitness that are still there. So it's traditional to go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week, right? That's I'll stop there. Do you think that's something that's still within the landscape of like that's a tradition, the intentions of just going to the gym, right?
I think so. Within, if we're time indexing it to a very, to a very small period of time.
Yeah.
And
30 years.
30 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a tradition. Yeah.
Well, then on top of that, let's try to be super simple in it. We're still, the people are still doing machines, still using machines of resistance. No matter how hard Paul Chek tried to invoke like the controversies that machines are death, they're still used at a really high rate because of simplicity and ease of use and ease of like instruction. That's a tradition inside of fitness that's been there since the start of it. Nautilus, probably late 50s was a Nautilus starting point into the 60s. So that's still there.
Yeah, and I think
aerobic activity, running programs are still there.
Right.
We can call aerobic like the attempt of improving cardiovascular function, right? Whatever that is, because it's not the only intention why people did it. A lot of people did it for weight loss and because they thought, they were going to have a stronger heart, the strongest heart in their neighborhood. But that's still there.
Yeah. And it's interesting how, it's a similar thing within philosophy, I guess, too, where there are kind of these different camps. I mean, there's certainly the ones you mentioned, but also within, strength sports, there's even though it's not called powerlifting, Olympic lifting, the pursuit of explosiveness and power, that is a tradition. Powerlifting itself is, the pursuit of absolute strength. Bodybuilding is the pursuit of, certain physique. That's a tradition with its own practices and beliefs. And, mixed modal is kind of a newer tradition, if we want to call it that. So it's an interesting question there. One question that comes up within religion, but also within philosophy, are these just mutually incompatible camps with their own different beliefs? Can they talk to one another? How should one choose a tradition, if that's even feasible? Things like that.
Yeah, well, they are all different, but there is some overarching things that are similar in that they're all movement. They're just that they're different forms of movement with different intentions. So I would say, to answer your question on the mixed modal piece, as far as a practice for the public, I really don't think it became as much of a practice for the public until the CrossFit total affiliates were above like a couple of thousand. That's what I would argue. It was like really like injected into. So it's only like, just over 10 years. That whole concept of like, oh, you can do Russian kettlebell swings and push-ups and rowing for 30 minutes, and that's cardio, right? The idea of multiple modalities at one point trying to be sustainable that never were sustainable. So I think that has only been that's not, I guess, well, what am I trying to say there? That's only 10 years out of the 30 years we were using, right? It's only been the past 10 years.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I started a point to answer your question on how this mixes in. There's still overarching concepts of movement. but the intentions underneath them and like the dose response and et cetera are extremely different.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think this also gets to some of the questions we were asking before of like both, and this is really where I think philosophy comes in and reason, rationality, both within traditions themselves, both within these fitness traditions, but also among all the general fitness traditions. To what extent should we be questioning their presuppositions and modalities, and can we even intercompare? In religion, there's always this question of like, can you even like within philosophy of religion, there was always this discussion of like, can you even have a discussion where you're talking about these different beliefs and ethical frameworks and principles, because they're just such different presuppositions, such different frameworks. Can you even language that? I personally think you can and you should. But yeah, within fitness, this notion of like, to what extent should we not just say within a particular fitness tradition, oh, well, that's the way they did it back in the 70s, so that's the way we should do it now. And even among fitness traditions, like, oh, how do these interrelate, and which ones are silly and which ones are not? And well, maybe they're all folly, but
yeah. Well, no, it goes back to, because people see mixed modal practice as a progressive human adaptation. A lot of people see that today. I've taken, more than, well, it's going to be close to 20 years. Gulp. It's the first time I've said that. It'd be close to 20 years in my investigation of that to recognize that, we are, and you can hear it in my voice, and I'm probably going to beat that drum for another 10 years, where it was something that we definitely did practice. We thought it was a progressive adaptation, but really we saw that it was for a very select few, because as time goes on, back to your point on a presupposition, we grew our minds in answering, well, what is the real outcome we want for this practice in fitness? And if the outcome we want in the practice of fitness is doing it every day for 80 years, we're going to have to be careful with the dynamic contractions we think are making us so progressively adapted. And it's going to take us 10 years for a shit ton of people to figure out that it's not that adaptive whatsoever. So we fall back on this possibility that, the curmudgeon traditional model may have worked better, right? It's a concept that will never come to data. I think the data is actually out there. It's the people that gave the middle finger to that concept of dynamic unknowableness, getting better at everything for no reason and nothing for every reason. And that kept steady on like, no, it's bodybuilding and treadmill, I think that data is out there. It's just that, it's not popular, and people don't want to listen to it. And yeah, so.
False. If I throw a kettlebell at your face while you're trying to do a snatch, that's going to make you prepared for anything.
Whoops.
Life. Yeah, no, but even just the way you said that right there, it's just interesting. Like even that thought around bodybuilding and treadmill and stuff like that, even that is, like you said, we're talking like in the past 30 to 50 years, right? That's now, of course, we can then tie that into, the longer term practice of humanity of just like resistance and moving, of course.
Yeah.
But like the traditions themselves of like, there are these books about it. It permeates the culture. People who are not warriors who are doing it and things like that. This is very recent phenomena.
Yeah. And we can't mix like emotion and and passion inside of it, because it will kind of confuse it. But that has to be said too. And this is why it goes back to my question to you around where culture and how people see things and where they get information and what's the options for information and what's the intentions of people, and if you have a majority of people, whether you like it or not, that are actually doing things just to show other people that they're doing things, it should make sense to us that what you're doing is worth showing off. So then you go, oh, I'll select whatever fitness thing I'm going to do that other people approve of, because I can gain attention from it or show others that I'm doing it. Look at me I'm doing that too. We're all in the same group. We're all talking the same language. Now, I think inside of that, there's a lot of unconsciousness, a huge amount of depression that's going to come from it when they realize they're not getting all the things they want to get from that. They realize that the attention they're gaining falls flat when 5 years later they have this little niggling right, shoulder thing that could have simply been fixed by just doing like rows and bench presses, and not showing that off. I think that's where we'll possibly end up with the conundrum that we're in around this, what's considered progression, and what I like try to hit hard on what is like, it's tradition. It's tradition of like the notion of simple aerobic work and resistance and just doing them over and over. So, have you thought of other areas that you wanted to ask about? Because I feel like we need to have like, or we should have done like a list, right? Of like, well, but I don't have those for you, because I don't know if you've thought of any, like what are traditions in fitness over the past 30 years that are either still there or,
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I listed off, I think we basically, it depends on how deep you want to go down into the notion of tradition, right? Like within aerobic, is there biking and rowing and running and things like that? And then, within
modalities.
Yeah, like within calisthenics, there's tumbling and cheer and, classical gymnastics and
Right.
things like that. And within strength, there's Olympic lifting and powerlifting and strongman, depending on how far you want to, go down the rabbit hole. So,
I think it looks like, not to hit on those particular points or the ones you just brought up, but I see the examples you had given as things that have always been there, but in today's day and age, it looks like it's there more prominently. Only because maybe people are looking out and seeing multiple things. I don't think am I making sense of that? Like
even stuff with like a barbell.
No. I'd say that one is going to hold some steady, firm historical context through the even technological age, or the, I don't really know what to call it, mass media, mass information that people have to offer, you know what I'm saying? But those other areas, it just looks like more people are doing it. That's what I'm saying, but they're not. It's just there's they now have access to show that they're doing it. Right. But one of the things that, just to use the barbell as a point, there are some things that kind of move their way through that kept increasing in numbers. And I would call that mixed modal intense work. That definitely went by the barbell and then kept going up, and then with mass media and everyone's doing it, it not only looked like a lot of people were doing it, there really were a whole lot of people doing it. Yeah. And it kept going up. So that's one of those inside there that, am I biased on that just simply because of my lens? Or do you feel it's the same way?
I don't think so. I mean, that seems reasonable to me. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. I may be wrong on it too, but yoga is one that did that same thing, where it just went up. It kept going up, and people are like, look what I'm doing. And it's like, oh, it's not just that we can see that you're doing it now. There's a lot more people doing it, so, and ironic, two of those are paradoxical, and one's driving the nervous system up and one's driving it down. Right. And anyways, we can go philosophically down each of those holes of how they don't balance one another, because they're both essentially, anyways.
One question I wanted to ask that we have discussed a little bit in the past, but I thought it was particularly relevant for tradition in fitness. And I'm just, it's fine if you don't have a hard and fast answer on it, but just something I thought was worthy of discussion is, we've asked the question before, and you've given very interesting answers to the question, what's the long-term goal for the practice of fitness? And it seems to me that we've discussed two potential different options. So one is, 50, 100 years in the future, people getting up and doing, it's not called gain and sustain, but yep. You turn on an episode of FIP, because that's the only media that's left at that time. And then you are either doing some gain or sustain, or possibly both, a crazy day, a wild day.
With glasses with us.
With glasses, yeah.
You're with us.
Yeah, you're with us.
Yeah, I'm slapping your ass as you come into the room.
Oh
What's
my
up, Robbie? And I'm not really, but I am. You know, like, man, I just can't wait till that happens.
You just gave
Get
Brandon
in there.
you gave Brandon the content for like 1,000 memes with just that movement right there.
But I indirectly just threw something in there, right? Of like number the shit we're going to have to deal with. Just think about that. Like the language of like, well, what is nefarious when you get inside of that world, right? Gosh, let's not go there. Let's not go there. Let's.
I'll bring it back in just a second, but
Oh
just thinking
gosh.
through for just so like, you know how deep fakes are getting better and better. Like they're
Yeah.
not even gonna have to take it. You and I have said almost every possible word that would need to be said between all of these podcasts, and like they're just gonna be able to make us say whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, in the Oculus,
Yes.
as people do in Gain and Sustain.
Uh-huh.
There will be
We're
episodes.
gonna
There'll be episodes of FIP that weren't even recorded that say things that we totally disagree with. That they
seven levels, all with different disagreements and arguments.
But anyway,
Yeah, there's going to be a new energy system created, the technological energy.
The future will be
Supra.
powered by people doing Gain and Sustain as they are listening to pre-recorded episodes of FIP and future episodes of FIP that never existed, but then have been created.
The only way you'll be able to hear it is if you're at a resting level of 15.0 millimoles of lactate. That's the only way you can hear it. And yes, you can get there through poor lifestyle as well, you know, because, you know, people can reach metabolic acidosis by just going down that route. So, hey, or you can just do a real hard 3-minute row and then like try to focus.
Yeah.
Right. That's the only way you can hear it. And as soon as the levels start to drop, you're like, guys, I think I'm leaving the room. He's out. Your Oculus is powered by lactate, hydrogen ions.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. What a great intention to keep people on the high intensity train.
Yeah, that's the orange theory of the future.
You can't get in here unless you are powered by high intensity.
Yeah.
Very authoritarian and dystopic at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, where did you go there? How did we get? I knew we weren't going to come back. Bring us back.
How do we come back? No, I know exactly where we are. So basically, we were discussing. So, what's the long-term goal for the practice of fitness? So, you know, one version of this that we've discussed in the past is 50 to 100 years in the future. People just get up and they do, you know, some version of resistance.
It's this innate knowledge, right? Or this,
right?
That's the long term. Yeah.
And you've said something to the effect of when someone asks them, "Well, why are you doing that?" They'd say, well, that's just what you do. I mean, that's what we'll do. And that really is very much tied into this notion of tradition, where it's like, it's imparted wisdom from previous generations where you can't even necessarily articulate the reasons behind it. So that's one option.
Yeah.
And the other option, which seems like a different option, is where people would have a rational understanding of the whys and the history behind the practice of fitness, where the answer wouldn't just be, that's just what you do. It'd be, oh, here's reason X, Y, Z. So do you have any thoughts about what you would consider the ideal there in relation to what would be, you know, ideal practice of fitness in the future?
Anything different than what the first option is?
Oh, so you think the first one is the ideal?
Well, I think, for sure.
And what are your thoughts on, like, do you think?
So maybe I didn't understand the second part if I wasn't clear on.
Sorry. So yeah, I mean, the second part, and maybe this is where I'm unclear. Just I kind of wonder, like, to me, yeah, that's where it starts to get problematic. Like I mean, obviously, if you're a kid or something like that, you may not be able to articulate the reasons. But if someone asks you, like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" Like, I think there should be some basic understanding of like the why, not just because someone said so, or your parents said so, or your teacher said so. It's like, oh, well, this is why I'm doing resistance, or this is why I'm doing. Do you see what I mean there?
Oh yeah, for sure. So, maybe I need to be more clear on, it's not just that simple answer, or that's just what you do. I think that's just what we use in short language to say, well, what does it look like? So I still think they're going to know why.
Okay.
You know, they're going to be able to say, like, well, they may be able to tell the whole story, and some will tell it lengthily and some people will tell it short, but they still have the knowledge and awareness. That's what that's why I called it innate. It's an intrinsic action, right? And I just wanted to play that story out, right? We do want to get it to the point, and I know there's a lot of shit in between, but you asked the question, and then I dreamed that big dream, goal, audacious idea of like, it's spoken about in the traditional language of like, remember we laughed about it on previous episodes, right? People are talking like, remember back in the day, we were like thinking that doing this practice is going to make us better people. And isn't that crazy? We went through that 30-year. Oh yeah. Well, get this. Do you remember there was these groups of humans that would come into a room and do shit they actually couldn't do with music and loud and fucking just, and then we realized over, that's, I think we'll look back and laugh on that. And then we'll be able to tell the stories. So that's the tradition of going through that. And I do think that I definitely sit more on the side, in 2022 and looking to the future, in that in the philosophical dilemma of who we're dealing with at the current time. I just don't think for a long period of time people are super interested in going after their physical potential for their whole life. It's just not, it's not of interest. You know what I'm saying? So I that's why I know all the impending struggles. I know what happens with institutions and the imparting of knowledge and who owns the knowledge. I know all those, intermediate, really arduous steps. I know that. And then I make the assumption, ... way down the line, there's an awareness. There's an awareness through generations. And so but you make a good point. I do maybe need to do, like, not to make it a claim or make it like, factual and predictions, because humans are poor at that, but I should get better with numbers and say something like a timeline and et cetera, which I think you can do, right? If you were to talk about like, just guessing on some things, right? On what would create that change and what would have to be embedded, and how does it, like, kind of like the Steve Jobs or Bill Gates announcements in the 80s or 90s, right? Of stuff that they said of, what was it, like a laptop on every, and then Steve Jobs obviously took it to another level and was like, well, I want to say the same thing, but it was a device, a device that you could get a whole bunch of things in, right? And lo and behold, like, we're close to being there, right? So it'd be like asking the question, like, or maybe it's not, Robbie, tell me if I'm wrong, but like, well, why do you have that phone? And I don't know, I got a lot of answers for it, but you see, like, it's just inside the system. It's like, it's a part and process. And using the phone analogy, it's great that I could tell you stories about what we learned about pulling that real long cord just to talk to that girl I wanted to talk to in high school. Like, those are good stories to talk about it, which creates not only awareness, but an appreciation for the particular device I have in front of me, right? And so you see, I am here and I'm answering that simply, but I do know about the tradition. I don't know if I carefully did that with a different form of technology.
No, I mean, that was helpful. I mean, I think one of the things I understood what you were saying, but just wanted to clarify, because that was very helpful for me, is, I mean, I kind of innately bristle against, like, that's what you do. I would say, like, to use a nutrition example, like, I don't think anyone needs to have a PhD in nutrition to eat healthy, but like having some basic awareness about, like, oh, lots of vitamins and minerals, I have a good psychological relationship, I'm less inflamed, I mean, just some basic reasons, because otherwise, well, parents said so and teachers said so, we're back to Dr. Oz said so. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
There has to be some, it goes back to kind of our conversations about it's this delicate balance between, obviously when you're a kid, there's certain received wisdom that you just, even to get on in the world, you've just got to accept and deal with.
Yeah.
But then later on, once you reach the age of reason, you reach, maturity and adulthood. Like, yeah, if someone asks me why I have that phone, yeah, great question. That is a really good question. Philosophically, why am I doing this? Like, why do I have this thing? And is this helping my life? And so obviously, like you said, there will be different degrees to which different people in the future answer about, fitness history or knowledge of why they're doing it. But like, if the answer was something like, I don't know, well, that's just, I was told to do it and I've been doing it for 20 years. That to
which
me
is
was
the
like,
answer today, by the way, for a lot of people, right?
Right.
And this is the thing, and they could be healthy. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's what I'm saying. I'm just interested personally in the next steps. I do believe that there has to be knowledge with the why, and just keep going on with what you're doing. That's my point. So I just take a long, it's a good question. It makes me strengthen my storyline for that long-term goal for fitness. Because right now, if it's on a podcast and it's short, I just fucking I go hard and like way too fast.
No, but I mean, it's a good.
It's okay.
Point.
It's all the time I have. I can't sit down and contemplate and play it out. So I appreciate the reminder that I need to clarify that.
I mean, it's a big audacious goal, and it's a good one. But yeah, just getting some, there's a lot of virtue to it, but just getting some clarity on some of the things behind it. So
I think what ties in another, before you go there, I hope you got a reminder as to what you're going to get to there. I think I wrote down a note here as we were getting through it, and we did it kind of like tradition in fitness, but can we take a brief period of time just to quickly get to the same area for fitness coaching? So is that any different, or is that like, because this is what I spoke about on the CCP call this past week. We just had, by the way, a huge diversity around the globe this time, like the highest level, I would say, of diversity around the globe. Like cool. Countries on there that I was like, wow, like this is so fascinating that someone's listening in or someone's getting it. A huge amount of gratitude based upon that. I hope that doesn't sideline me, but I spoke of, because I got to speak on that first call around this big hairy question, like what is a coach? Like, whew, man, like, 2 hours doesn't do it for me, right? But I do my best to say, like, I throw in like historical context, and I throw in public perception. I throw in, this whole fancy and fun and interesting game of fitness, where it comes from. And then I start tiptoeing into this like career process and what teaching versus learning means, and how teaching and learning must go together. And of course, you can see what pulls in there, right? These truths of like, oh, wow, this job is going to be like 30 to 40 years. And holy fuck, did he just say autonomy for a client? Like, these are the things that really, like, right away strike some, like, I had numerous emails this time around. So the way I said it this time was the same way, but a little different, that really struck hard. Good ones, right? But they were like, oof, like, I'm going to need some help in contending with these things, right? And again, I still say at the end of it, just as like a asterisk small print, this doesn't mean these are truths, but I just propose them to make you contemplate and think about alignment and what it is you want to do. And why are you smirking, Robbie? Because you felt that at one point in time? Did you?
Oh yeah, I mean, but I love that stuff. But I mean, but yeah,
okay.
I mean, yeah.
Oh, you're smirking because you're like Michael Jackson with the popcorn, right? You're like,
I mean, no. I can just imagine like the
doing a traditional thing, watching this thing happen.
The wide-eyed CCP coach, like, your clients shouldn't need you. We should be doing this for 30 to 40 years. Go. Okay.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly. And why are you doing it? Yeah, that's just what you do. Just to top it off. Just to like hit it home. But I was speaking to them around, to try to get them inspired around, this long-term arduous goal of what I called the fitness master. And to be inspired about fitness mastery, not through popularity or not how they see the way the fitness universe operates today. And I tried to get them excited around, what that long-term project might look like even a concept of all the positives inside the long-term project of you learning and you helping other people learn about self-navigation and physical expression and all the wonderful things that can be inside of like just trying physical challenges, right? And learning about yourself and all those things. And Robbie, I was stumped when I did some research afterwards, when I made the statement of like, giving them, because I tried to give them some ideas of setting themselves up with other fitness masters that are around today, right? To have a mentor-mentee relationship or to get, and there's not a lot. So it does make you question with this project of tradition of fitness coaching. There's not a lot of people still around who were 20 something in the 80s that are still doing fitness and have like played out that timeline journey through the technician, craftsperson, fitness master phase to a point of, either education or, sagedom or whatever that is, right? Not even like writing or podcasting or whatever, it's like, am you staying with me there? Like, I just tried to use another parallel, which could be incorrect, but another vocation, like an engineer, right? It's like, 55, stop, but if you go, well, all these people are there from 50 to 55, there's a lot of them. And there's a lot of them that are really fucking good at that, and of course they can take on different roles and management, CEO and head of groups and et cetera, or really deep academic stuff. But man, in fitness, there's not. So, there's one thing is like, there's not a lot of tradition yet in fitness coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this leaves us with, you and I and a lot of people to go through this time period of like trying to set tone for what is inspiring for people for a fitness career. And we're in the trenches, through the weeds, trying to figure it out. Like, what does it look like? Do I need to have this knowledge of nutrition? My belief is that in the next couple of years, this is biased because we want to really push that for this year, but we're going to have to raise our ability in things like listening and attentiveness and communication and essentially behavior. So I think if we think that today there's a lot of people who think that, oh, you can't be a coach if you don't have lots of high standing in nutrition information. There's some truths to that, but I think over time, it's going to be the behavior aspect. It's going to be like, can you communicate with people? Can you really be empathetic to the life that they live and where fitness is going to fit in, et cetera. Sorry I was lengthy on that, but that was a whole long-winded thing to say in asking the question, like, is there tradition in fitness coaching? There's not.
No, I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. I had a few different thoughts on that. So one thought is, like we were saying, it's relatively young. So that's part of the situation, just like the first philosophers or the first priests or the first people who were authors or something like that. You know what I mean? Like when this is first starting out, you're just kind of figuring it out. Secondly, just, going back to like Maslow's hierarchy or even just, pure like on the ground sociological considerations, like, yeah, if you couldn't make money doing it, you know what I mean? Like, and you couldn't stay in this career the same way you could as like a engineer or an academic or things like that. And even those are things that, like, I'm sure as they were getting started, maybe you couldn't. Third thought I had was, this is actually something I'd like to do a podcast on at some point. There's a guy named Thomas Kuhn, who's a famous historian of science and philosopher of science, but basically he wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And one of the things he proposed was this idea that science goes through these stages of what he calls paradigm changes in normal science. So like Newton comes along, all our stuff gets tossed about, and then a couple hundred years of normal science, then Einstein tosses it about, and then normal science. So like right now with fitness coaching and even something like functional medicine, which is relatively new, like we're still trying to figure it out. Like we're in the stages of like conventional medicine 100 years ago. Yep. There weren't tons of medical schools. There wasn't a tradition. I mean, obviously there were isolated forms of being a doctor in different cultures, but that was a very It wasn't what we today call that.
Yeah.
So we're really in this kind of, and one of the things he talks about in those paradigm shifting periods of time is that fundamental assumptions about what is what are constantly in flux.
Mhm.
So like once Newton sets the tone on like, this is what space is, this is what
Mhm.
time is,
Yeah.
now you can go do normal science.
Yeah.
But during that time, like it's all in flux. So, going back to a lot of the stuff we've discussed, a lot of these things are fundamentally up for grabs right now. Like these definitional concepts of like what it is to be fit, what it is to be healthy, what longevity truly means. And maybe out of that normal science will come out. I don't know. There are probably asymmetries between science and the practice of fitness in a lot of different ways. But
For sure.
those are some of the things I think about as you were mentioning that.
Yeah, cool. No, that your language there also gives me a good reason to go back and review that like future concept of what an impact means and what success means and what does knowledge among the masses mean, and like clearly define that a whole lot better for not only fitness, right, but for the fitness coach. Yeah, and that's an arduous one too, because there's a lot of cofactors of institutions and knowledge, but also a positive light to it is this thing called YouTube, which is an example of information that could easily get out there. And the negative side of that, then keep going on that one, is that if it's not going to be sensational, people are not going to be interested in listening to it.
Right.
Yeah, because I think of the medicine route, and I take the same idea. I'm actually more of a history buff in one area. It would be biological medicine. I love just because of my influence of the doctors that I had or who were around me in my starting knowledge around that for myself, my own health. But then, let's call it digging in, is going back to times of Socrates and others, having these basic principles that are in place, and then seeing it play out over time a whole different way, as things change and time changes and culture changes, and the reason for doing that. And I just find that fascinating how the doctor went from that, and that whole transition from that into like not quickly in this terms, but to fixing things, right, and seeing fixing things as a progression. It's like, gosh. And of course there's lots of parallels to fitness for that, right? Let's just fix your current lifestyle, and we can do that with this exercise, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, game changing. Don't forget to put your picture up on the board after 12 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. But then time goes on, and then we're like, oh wow, we probably should have said, what is our definition of success for the long term for this? And then we probably would have had a different decision making on what we started with. And back to fitness, we just don't have enough. We don't have enough. I don't see, where I sit on it. I definitely sit more pessimistically on that future. Like, well, maybe we'll all come to an agreement. It's like, I don't know, based upon what currently just happened over the past couple of ideas, and just what information is, and what the definition of expertise is, what the definition of science is. Like, we're definitely in an interesting time for that.
Yeah.
Like, who holds that information, and who should you trust in, and what are the intentions behind that?
Yeah.
So.
No, that's true. I mean, I think in the conventional medicine one, there's really, that one is really interesting for a number of reasons. But like going back to the paradigm shifting and the normal science, like just because it gets settled on what the concepts are and what you should do doesn't mean the normal science is good, right? So like, when conventional medicine is essentially born, the top 3 reasons people die are all acute issues. And it's that paradigm is born out of like, how do we stop these acute issues? And now 100 years later, it's a set of different issues. So now we need to redefine what that is. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely see the reason for pessimism in a lot of different things. I one of my, just because I like it and study it, and I know you have a background in it, but something like functional medicine to me and the functional approach gives me a lot of hope. It's like, it's a different philosophy or way of doing things that's born out of the inadequacies of the old paradigm. And certainly not the solution to everything, but just hope that like people at a large scale level can step back, look at these implicit incorrect assumptions of the conventional paradigm and say, hey, wait, why don't we come up with a different paradigm and do things a little bit differently? So
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's probably an offline conversation for us another time. Interesting, because I have some interesting thoughts on that too, of the things that functional medicine is going to have to deal with, or functional nutritional medicine is going to have to deal with, is the institutions and the culture and the settings, and the intentions of what's to gain by giving the knowledge, and then the interest in the knowledge from a huge host of people, where it has ended up in that quote unquote project, because that project's been going on for 20 years. I was ironically one of the early people that were kind of like the personal trainer at the functional medicine conferences, right? So I was like there with Reed Davis and Charles Poliquin and Jeff Turbat, and Reed was like, interesting. So it's being able to not turn it into just the exact same thing that medicine fall prey to, which is that a huge ton of people need the information, but the person doesn't have the time to deal with the relationship, to change behaviors. And instead, what do you do? Not what you do, but what most people will do. Here's this supplement. And so now you're doing the exact same thing in a whole different model. And I know this to be true, and sorry to be going on with this, but guess who's buying all the functional medicine education and nutraceuticals? It's big pharma. They're starting to purchase these folks outright because they know that knowledge that's inside that system may be coming down the road. So people like you and others have to like continue to push hard to say that we're going to do these diagnosis, and we're going to do these assessments. But in the road to get there is not just this thing right here. Like it's a lot on you. Like there's a lot of responsibility on you for your behaviors and the things you do, and then et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me run and get my power cord real quick, and then we'll wrap up because my computer's about to.
Okay. What number are you at, by the way?
I believe it's 34, I want to say.
Oh, you mean you got 34% left?
Oh, I thought you meant the episode number.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I should ask that question earlier. Number 34. Gosh, first thing comes to my mind is like, who is what? Oh, was Walter Payton number 34?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Percentage wise, it basically flashed me something saying like your computer's about to shut off. So
oh shit.
That's where I was at. Sorry.
So I think Walter Payton was 34. Great number.
I was wrong. Episode 33.
Oh, Patrick Roy, of course.
Jesus died at age 33.
I think he was 33.
There's a non sequitur. But I'm trying to think about it at 33.
So yeah, the fitness coaching tradition, that's a that's exciting, right? We're in the throes of writing history. That's a cool way to look at it, right?
And it's in response to, I think this is the other thing that happens with like philosophy, but other things, like it's in response to new things on the ground, just the same way the definition or the discussion around like what it means to be human is in many ways related to what was going on 1,000 years ago, but also very new now. Like the fitness coach is a response to a new set of circumstances, and functional medicine is a response to a new set of circumstances that in a lot of ways did not exist. And like, what do we do now that we're here? Like we aren't going back.
Yeah.
What I mean? Like we aren't going back. So what do we do now that we're here?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I think in the interim, what we're trying to do, which is a big, hairy problem, is define what a fitness coach is. So that's also the big issue along the way, right? Is like, we're trying to build systems, we're trying to build values, we're trying to build, dare we call it oaths, right? Of this practice. And we don't even know what we're called, and we don't even know who we should pull into the conversation. It's like, we're all clamoring, but to your point, I'll use your optimism on the process that goes through in order to get to something that's a good rendition over time. I think that's one thing that I did pick up on. I forget what was under on your notes of, what we don't want to fall prey to is, and I got to pick this one, of course, because the book says so. I think you put that in quotations, like,
Yep. Whatever the
oh,
book is.
dude.
Yep.
Right? Because the CrossFit Journal said so.
Yeah.
Right? Like, man, oh man, you got to give it to them, right? Like, I mean, what a way to like get a movement, right? And to get people all behind a concept and an idea, is to eloquently write those things to be like mind-numbing changes, right? In really how you're going to perceive it. Accessibility to everyone. The knowledge can be for everyone. This is how we can do it, So, but now we're years later in the concept of tradition in this short interim history of this, let's call it 20 years, right? That would be argued by Greg, but I'd say like 20 years of it's how it's like bang, and then there's like, segmented areas of the bang, that we could say, well, what's the tradition inside of that? And it's still a lot of, well, because the book says so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And even to the point, dude, where there's like children of people who I'm talking to now, and they're now injected with it.
And that to me is what's so interesting sociologically, because it mirrors a lot of what happens with religion too. So, Jesus or Buddha, whoever you want to reference, like in a lot of ways, that was the paradigm shift, like this questioning of these old paradigms and like, hey, is this the right way to think about things? But then very suddenly thereafter, that becomes dogmatism. So like, I think both of us would give credit where credit's due, even though we disagree. Like that What Is Fitness article is philosophy in fitness. Like that is a really good philosophical question. And like, while we may disagree about, the 10 fundamental, sort of physical skills, but like that central point about like, really? The dude who does an Ironman is the best paradigm of fitness, and like someone who can lift a certain amount or like do a certain amount of pull-ups, like where do they even fit? Like, no. Let's broaden this horizon and ask these questions. But then, okay, we had that, dogma breaker, so to speak, but then it became incredibly dogmatic thereafter.
Yeah.
It was like, this is the way, the light, and the truth. And we
Yep.
cannot disagree with that. It's just,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
All because the Black Box Summit was one like intervening point of that. Yep. Some people who had practiced in that area said, there are other options that you can do in parallel to this. That's when the veil gets pulled over everyone's eyes, where everyone's like, oh, wait now, that's not what the book says. And here you have the splicing, right? The splicing of, we got to hold the standard for the next so many years. Look where it gets you.
Irony of ironies, because they were supposed to be the ones bringing together, the Ripitos and the, Rob Wolf and, Greg Everett and all these different folks from these different traditions within fitness to talk to each other. But yeah.
Well, we did talk to each other. All those people did.
Right.
But then when you talk to the one person who was inside that thing that brought us all together, there was no talk. It's like, no, you can't say that. Yeah. You can't say that, touch and go barbells, if for the wrong person at the wrong time, is extremely fatiguing on the nervous system. You can't say, and that's what I said. And I also said, bodybuilding, to be short, to answer people's question, bodybuilding for a number of years will allow people to participate in this far more effectively. And then maybe you might win over time. I also said, third one, you should have these multiple systems. Have an entry system of personal training into CrossFit classes. And then you can have an autonomy program design OPT model on the back end. I put that up all on the board, everyone taking notes, all my future CCP coaches getting ready to just put the credit card through to sign up for what I had to offer for education. Right. And the whole back room is like, well, this is not going to work for what we had in mind. Right.
And I mean, correct me if you would, obviously you were there, so you'd know way better than I would, but it probably wasn't something like No, I don't think that would work, but I would, be willing to sit down and discuss that with Jane. But no, that won't fucking work. Let's get him the fuck out of the, you know what I mean? The movement, that type thing.
Yeah, the classic line was choose your friends more wisely. That's an indirect way of saying, yeah, it's either our way or the highway. Just to have some humor around it, Greg and Dave fought over a fucking med ball clean. Like, just think about this. Humans going at it about a med ball clean, like personal attacks, because Greg was like, yeah, this is fucking stupid. This is what a clean is with a barbell, and this is why we do it, and this is force development and position of the spine and co-contractions and etc. And then Dave's comment, which caused a kerfuffle, right? But just think about it, just two people, adults, just going at that concept. mind-blowing but so much that made so much sense, right? After the fact, like, gosh, how, let's give it to Dave, how admirable to hold the standard to what is like what has to be the doctrine and the truth, right? Because he immediately was like, wait, now I don't think, he probably calculated this very quickly and probably had some other things with Greg too behind the scenes no one knew about. All fair, right? But in this public manner, probably could have went about asking some tougher questions, to Greg at that point in time, but instead just went like right to the throat with the fat fucker or whatever, commentary came out there, all over a med ball and doctrine. That's what it was about. But let's just be empathetic here. Imagine if you didn't have the competency, right? You don't have lots of competency. And I'm not saying this about Dave whatsoever, but imagine if you didn't have the competency, let's call it an exercise phys and like tremendous background, right? And you put together manuals for not only coaching clients, but manuals for coaching coaches for clients that you want spread amongst thousands of different facilities, right? And you really think there's a lot of good inside of that language, of that particular thing that you just spent maybe months on developing. And then you come to this setting where everyone's going to talk about your things. And then someone gets up and goes, that's fucking stupid. You got to have a little bit of understanding as to what brings about that, issue and tension, right? Because I was quickly able to, at this point in time now, put myself in that position, right? And say, when someone does that to me after what I think is like really honestly powerful, and then someone's like, and I quickly know right away, it's like, yeah, that is fucking stupid. Then what do I do about it, right? For me personally, I just sit back and go, oh gosh, that was so good. I really need to rewire that. But that's what I'm saying. If you don't have those skills to do that, just have some empathy.
One might say philosophical reflection, or the ability to pause and
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. That's it.
But I do think that example is a good example of like both of what can be good within traditions and bad within traditions. So I'm like, one of the things that actually drew me to CrossFit very much so, and I think this is also what drew me to philosophy, but also functional medicine and stuff like that, is like, I personally, for me, I've always been interested in these disciplines or endeavors that like, philosophy is philosophy of music and art and religion and math and history and stuff like that. And CrossFit is, strongman and Olympic lifting and powerlifting and aerobics and all this. So that was always interesting to me. But like the idea of bringing all those different traditions together with experts in those fields and crosstalk, that's a very interesting notion. And then there's the flip side of the holy shit with tradition, which is it's very easy for traditions to lapse into dogmatism, into ours is the best and we are the way, the light, and the truth. And it's hard to resist that. CrossFit's kind of lost its ascendancy at this point, rightly so in a lot of ways. But at the time when it's all exploding, it's hard culturally to be like, well, what about this? You probably know better than anyone else, like saying that stuff. So it's important when things explode culturally, or when everyone else is saying you should be doing this, like maybe you should, but maybe you should also have independence of mind and free thinking and ask just like, should we or should we not?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, man, that's philosophical conundrum there of trying to get into the minds of all those coaches who, did the weekend and had an aha moment and bought the affiliate rights for their area and had great intentions. It's hard to get inside of all those minds. It's a difficult one. For what I quickly get to in the answer for it all, if we were to rewrite it, which is impossible, but it's fun as just a concept to thought experiment it. If the personalities were just to move aside, I think it would have been a positive firestorm. I think actually, I don't think it needed all of its vitriol and personality and sensationalism, because the concept which was underpinning it, and you always wonder back to like what Greg was thinking at the time. That's what I always think about, is like Greg needed to, and the company needed to, when it transitioned over to Eric, it needed to go back to that point in time of Greg's like philosophy and the things that sparked that intention. And the company needed to go back to that and say, like, what was that made you think about this movement? Because it was more than just the fucking mixed modalities. You just hit the nail on the head for it. It was like, everyone in, you can have your say. You could say, this is how you do it, right? I'm going to say this is a possible method, right? But I'm going to welcome however you want to play with this and use it and fucking mess with it and sleep with it. You can become obsessed around it. Sure, there's limits to that. He always said that. But then he always said, like, if someone comes in and says, I got an idea, right? He'll say, try it out with my athletes, try it out with these people, right? And there was years, in case people don't think there was years of this successfully. So that would be the antidote to a metaphorical hypothesis of refixing that, was if the personalities just fucking left it alone, it would have reached, I think, a better standard of what I think the initial intentions were for its impact on fitness. And that's fucking sad.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, you certainly know these people way better than I do, but just from outsider looking in, like, as I came into CrossFit roughly around the time of the Black Box Summit and Rob Wolf and all this different stuff, like, I think I've mentioned this asymmetry before, like, in what I saw, obviously in any movement, there's dogmatism, but like, if you look at the course of the paleo movement in the past, since 2010 versus CrossFit with like the double Russells and Dave and Greg, and just very, very strong personalities, however you want to call it, just like there was some progression of dogmatism and other things like that. And two things that were intertwined at one point in a lot of ways. And like, there just wasn't this level of dogmatism in the one, or like character assassination or, other things like that, where there really was in the other. And again, I think tying it back in tradition, this is another important thing to remember. Like, sometimes things are entrenched because they are the right things and there's good reasons behind them, but also sometimes it's because there are big personalities behind them who just, character assassinate others, and then that's what gets entrenched. So like, this is why it's so important to be able to rationally reflect and not just say the book says so, or the elders say so,
or
like,
the journal says so.
Exactly. Like, we do on the one hand really want to try to respect people who have wisdom and who have more lived experience. Like, we don't want to reject it outright, but have the courage, I think I forget exactly how Kant put it, but have the courage to think for yourself. You know what I mean? Have the courage to reflect on stuff. So
yeah, and they just kind of, because the courage to think for yourself, just they didn't allow that over time, right? It was like, no, you got to put this shirt on and pump this, and that's what was lost, which is unfortunate. But again, that's why we're right here too. That's positive to it, right? Is we thought, oh, they'll still be open-minded. Although I may not seem like I'm open-minded. That's just I just use shorthand publicly to make it seem like I'm closed-minded on progression. But I'm open-minded to what's to come and how to mix that all together. I think to summarize, that was a great summary of that. And also just somewhat of a summary too, is to, I think to lean back on one of my mentor, Bernie's words, he would say, you got to organize all that information and then you got to be able to orchestrate it. But you got to be able to orchestrate it in a way, and this is the key point for tradition and time and et cetera, that gets synthesized, right? That gets inside, that could run itself, and it works, and it helps everyone. Those are powerful words. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very good point. It's not just the accumulation of different facts. It's how do they all interrelate, and can you have, I mean, going back to what you were saying, like, you know, you being open-minded, and, you know, that discussion at the Black Box Summit, we've talked about this before, like, when you're on a podcast, when you're having a discussion with someone, can you just enter the space of reasons? You know, I don't, you've never said to me, and I'll never say to you, like, you know, I've never heard you say to me, well, fuck you, Robbie, that's stupid. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's the space of reasons where it's like, oh, well, why do you think that? And I lob a reason over the net, and then you lob one back. But you can always tell when someone's kind of flying in the face of that, when they're like, an ad hominem attack, screw you, you don't know what you're talking about, instead of like engaging with the idea.
Yeah, well, this ties us back to our initial starting point of long-term podcast and long conversation, is what I think humans are striving for, is to listen to people talk out, almost like listening to a comedian talk about some truths that no one wants to talk about. But it allows people to, in long form, listen to people talk out something that they know there's a 3-minute bit on it somewhere else, that they know inside of it is like, it's not enough. There's not, like, you know, just for James to say just autonomy, like, fuck him, right? But then listen to 2 hours, the back and forth and the in-betweens. And yeah, I think to today, that's tough to do. I don't know, it's tough to do. But hey, we'll go on. We'll keep going. We'll be back.
People who are driving to, you know, it's 2 hours from South Bend to Chicago. So people who are making their commute from South Bend to Chicago can pop on a podcast, and
wow, I didn't know it was that
way
long.
there and wait one way back. So, or in
trains,
they could do that too.
But is a 2-hour train?
About 2.5. There's a South Shore line that runs. It's kind of like a commuter train that runs multiple times a day from South Bend directly to downtown Chicago.
Cool. Man, I didn't know it was that long.
Yeah. But we are technically closer to Chicago than we are to Indy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really enjoyed that one.
Yep. Yeah, likewise. Thanks for the, as always, for the proposal of that particular target and topic to jam on. Make sure you smash the like button if you do have one. If you're listening or you hear anything, maybe you don't even, if you're listening to podcasts, there isn't something, just put your finger in the air and just like violently for 10 seconds, do it. We won't get anything from it. There's no bits and bytes that it's connected to, but we know you're doing it. Yep. Right. So smash that like button. Otherwise, give us a 5-star review, you know, even if you hate it, just simply because, listen, this is our livelihood. Yep. We're not like you. I will not be able to feed my family if you don't bring our standing of FIP up. So there's a little bit of shame inside of why you need to do it, regardless of your thoughts of what was discussed inside. I mean, your thoughts don't matter. It's just hitting 5 stars. You don't even really need to comment.
Yeah.
You know, just
5 stars for the sake of it.
Robbie's the greatest. You know, something like that. Just do that one. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what else? Smash the like button, hit 5 stars.
And make sure you turn on notifications.
And subscribe.
Notifications with that little ding bell. Have you seen that?
Oh, yes. Get notifications when, you know, you can get notifications of what Robbie and I are doing every day. You can hit the notification button. We'll tell you what we're up to, what we had for breakfast, the next topic, you know, other meanderings.
You should be reading a book or talking with your loved one, but you can actually get interrupted to hear that, you know, James went to the bathroom or Robbie for water.
Yeah, that was the 5th P. Ding.
Ding.
I mean, if you want to, right? So hit the notification button so you know we're up to. Subscribe. However, you can do that. You can subscribe to our podcast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like us and give us a 5-star review. Smash the like button.
And for an extra $10 a month for our insider circle, we will philosophically berate you. You can send us your ideas and we will, So
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's the next thing, iteration, right? We've set
Yeah.
up a Substack. Don't worry, it's a low cost. It's only $59 a month. I know it seems higher than what most people are doing, but we believe, our method is different than everyone else's. We're going to have everyone in there with differing opinions.
Fitness and Philosophy Plus.
Yes, that's what it's called.
Prime. Fitness and Philosophy Prime.
Yeah, yeah. Plus is so outdated. It's Prime.
Fit.
FIP Prime. FIP Prime.
Stay tuned for that, guys. Coming soon.
Alrighty. Take care.
All right.